The morning mist hung low over Windsor Castle as Queen Camilla stepped out of her private car, her face showing signs of stress that her carefully applied makeup couldn't quite hide. The past week had been a nightmare of headlines, angry phone calls, and whispered conversations in palace corridors. What should have been a simple family gesture had turned into the biggest royal scandal in months. It all started 3 weeks ago when Camilla decided to give her son, Tom Parker Bowles, something special for his birthday. The Queen Consort had been going through the late Queen Elizabeth's belongings, a task that fell to her as part of her new royal duties. Among the items was the Queen's personal jet, a sleek aircraft that had served the monarch faithfully for over 2 decades. The plane held memories of countless royal tours, state visits, and family holidays. Camilla thought it would be perfect for Tom, who had recently expanded his food business across Europe and needed reliable transportation. She saw it as a practical gift that would also honor the late Queen's memory by keeping the aircraft in use. The decision seemed logical at the time, especially since Tom had always been respectful toward his stepfather, King Charles, and had maintained a low profile. Despite his royal connections, the transfer was handled quietly through royal lawyers and aviation authorities. Tom was thrilled with the unexpected gift, immediately making plans to use the jet for his upcoming business trips to Italy and France. He even joked with friends about finally having his own royal transport, though he was careful to keep the news within his close circle. However, secrets have a way of coming to light in the world of royalty. A palace staff member, who had worked closely with Queen Elizabeth for over 15 years, noticed the aircraft's registration had changed. Sarah Mitchell had been the late Queen's personal flight attendant and knew every detail about the royal aircraft. When she realized the plane was no longer listed under royal ownership, she began asking questions. Sarah's inquiries led her to discover that the jet had been transferred to Tom Parker Bowles. She was shocked and deeply upset. The aircraft wasn't just a machine to her. It represented years of service to a monarch she had loved and respected. She remembered countless flights where Queen Elizabeth had worked on state papers, practiced speeches, and even enjoyed quiet moments looking out at the clouds below. Unable to contain her emotions, Sarah confided in her colleague James Peterson, a royal guard who had served the family for over 20 years. James had his own memories of the aircraft, having accompanied the Queen on numerous security details. He remembered how proud she had been of the plane, and how she had often mentioned wanting it to continue serving the royal family after her passing. James felt a deep sense of duty to protect the late Queen's legacy. He had sworn an oath to serve the crown, and watching royal property being given away to non-working royals troubled him greatly. After several sleepless nights, he made a decision that would change everything. He contacted a trusted journalist at the Times, someone he had worked with before on security matters. The story broke on a Tuesday morning with a headline that sent shockwaves through. Buckingham Palace. Queen Consort gifts late monarch's personal jet to her son. The article detailed how the aircraft, valued at over £12 million, had been quietly transferred without public knowledge or apparent consultation with other senior royals. The public reaction was immediate and fierce. Social media exploded with criticism of Camilla's decision. Many people felt that the late Queen's personal belongings should remain within the working royal family or be preserved as part of the nation's heritage. Comments ranged from disappointment to outright anger, with some calling for the gift to be reversed. Royal commentators were equally critical. Margaret Thornton, a respected royal biographer, appeared on morning television to express her concerns. She explained that the aircraft had been purchased with public funds during Queen Elizabeth's reign and should have remained under royal control. She also questioned whether Camilla had the authority to make such a significant decision without consulting King Charles or Prince William. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was tense. Staff members who had served Queen Elizabeth for decades felt betrayed and upset. Many of them had expected the aircraft to continue serving the current monarch or to be used for official royal duties. The idea that it was now private property belonging to someone outside the direct line of succession felt wrong to them. King Charles found himself in an impossible position. He loved his wife and understood her intentions, but he also recognized the severity of the public backlash. Palace advisors were urging him to distance himself from the decision while others suggested that standing by Camilla was more important for their marriage and his reign. Prince William was reportedly furious when he learned about the gift. Sources close to the Prince of Wales suggested that he felt the decision showed poor judgment and damaged the royal family's reputation. He had his own memories of flying with his grandmother on the aircraft and believed it should have been preserved for future generations. The palace's initial response was a brief statement saying that the Queen Consort had acted within her rights regarding personal property left to her discretion. However, this only fueled more criticism, as many questioned whether the aircraft should have been considered personal property at all. As the controversy grew, James Peterson watched the news coverage with mixed feelings. He was satisfied that the truth had come to light, but he also worried about the consequences of his actions. He knew that leaking information to the press was a serious breach of royal protocol, one that could cost him his job and reputation. Meanwhile, Tom Parker Bowles found himself at the center of a media storm he had never expected. Photographers camped outside his London home, and reporters called constantly seeking comment. He began to realize that accepting the gift might have been a mistake, regardless of his mother's good intentions. The story was far from over, and everyone involved knew that the coming days would determine not only the fate of the aircraft, but also the reputations of everyone connected to this royal controversy. The second day of the scandal brought even more intense scrutiny as investigative journalists began digging deeper into the aircraft transfer. The Daily Mail published a detailed timeline showing exactly how the jet had been moved from royal ownership to Tom Parker Bowles' name, revealing that the process had taken place over several weeks with the help of expensive legal firms. Tom woke up to find photographers still stationed outside his home, their long lenses pointed at his windows. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, royal correspondents, and even some of his business associates who were concerned about how the controversy might affect their partnerships. He realized that his quiet life away from royal duties was officially over. His sister Laura Lopes called him early that morning, her voice filled with worry. She had been watching the news coverage and was shocked by the intensity of the public anger. Laura had always managed to stay completely out of the royal spotlight, focusing on her art gallery business and raising her children. Now she feared that the entire Parker Bowles family would be dragged into the controversy. At Buckingham Palace, emergency meetings were being held throughout the morning. Palace Communications Director Amanda Richardson found herself in crisis management mode, trying to develop a strategy to contain the damage. The usual approach of letting royal scandals die down naturally wasn't working, as new details kept emerging and public anger continued to grow. King Charles was scheduled to attend a charity event that afternoon, but his private secretary suggested postponing it due to the media attention. Charles refused, insisting that he wouldn't let the controversy interfere with his royal duties. However, everyone knew that reporters would ask him about his wife's decision, putting him in an extremely difficult position. Meanwhile, James Peterson arrived at his post at Windsor Castle with a heavy heart. Other guards and staff members looked at him differently now, some with respect for standing up for the late Queen's memory, others with suspicion about his loyalty. His supervisor, Captain David Morrison, called him into a private meeting to discuss the situation. Captain Morrison was a fair man who had worked his way up through the royal protection ranks over 30 years. He understood James's motivation, but was also concerned about the precedent being set. If royal guards started leaking information to the press, it could undermine the entire security system that protected the royal family. "I understand why you did it, James," Morrison said quietly, closing his office door. "But you know this puts me in an impossible position. The palace is going to want someone to blame, and you've made yourself an obvious target." James nodded, knowing that his career was probably over. "I couldn't stand by and watch the Queen's memory be disrespected like that, sir. That aircraft meant something to her, and to all of us who served her." The conversation was interrupted by urgent news from London. A group of former royal household staff had organized themselves and were planning to release a joint statement criticizing Camilla's decision. These weren't current employees who could be silenced or controlled, but retired staff members who felt free to speak their minds. The group was led by Geoffrey Hartwell, who had served as the late Queen's private secretary for the final 8 years of her reign. Jeffrey had been planning to enjoy his retirement quietly, but the aircraft controversy had stirred up feelings he couldn't ignore. He had personally organized many of the Queen's flights and knew how much the aircraft had meant to her. Jeffrey's statement, released to multiple news outlets, was devastating in its measured criticism. He explained that Queen Elizabeth had often spoken about wanting her personal belongings to continue serving the crown after her death. He revealed that she had specifically mentioned the aircraft as something that should remain available for royal duties. Her Majesty understood that she was a custodian of royal heritage, not just an owner of personal property. Jeffrey's statement read, "She would have been deeply troubled to see this aircraft removed from royal service without proper consultation with the current monarch and his heir." The statement included signatures from 12 former staff members, including Sarah Mitchell and several other longtime employees. The fact that these people had served the late Queen faithfully for decades gave their words enormous weight with the public and media. At Clarence House, Camilla's own staff were struggling to manage the crisis. Her private secretary, Helena Grant, had been fielding angry calls from MPs, royal commentators, and even some members of the House of Lords. Several conservative politicians were questioning whether the Queen Consort understood her role and responsibilities. Helena finally convinced Camilla to cancel her scheduled appearances for the rest of the week, but this decision only generated more negative headlines. Royal correspondents interpreted the cancellations as evidence that Camilla knew she had made a serious mistake and was hiding from public accountability. The financial details of the transfer were also becoming public knowledge, adding another layer to the controversy. The aircraft's maintenance costs alone were over £200,000 per year, money that would now come from Tom's personal resources rather than the royal budget. Critics argued that this was actually good news for taxpayers, but the symbolism of the gesture continued to overshadow practical considerations. Tom finally decided to break his silence, releasing a carefully worded statement through his publicist. He expressed surprise at the intensity of the public reaction and insisted that he had only accepted the gift after being assured by his mother that it was appropriate. He also announced that he was considering all options regarding the aircraft's future, which many interpreted as a hint that he might return it. However, Tom's statement didn't calm the storm. Royal biographer Margaret Thornton appeared on BBC News that evening to discuss the deeper implications of the controversy. She explained that the incident revealed important questions about how royal property should be managed and who had the authority to make decisions about items that were purchased with public funds. "This isn't really about one aircraft," Margaret said during the interview. "It's about whether the royal family understands their role as custodians of national heritage. Every decision they make sets a precedent for future generations." The interview was watched by millions of people, many of whom were just learning about the controversy. Social media engagement continued to grow, with hashtags like the Royal Jet Scandal and Respect the Queen trending throughout the evening. As night fell, everyone involved in the controversy knew that the situation was far from resolved. The next day would bring more revelations, more criticism, and more difficult decisions for everyone involved. The third day of the crisis brought unexpected developments that would change everything. Tom Parker Bowles woke up to find legal documents had been delivered to his home during the night. A group of constitutional lawyers acting on behalf of concerned citizens had filed a formal challenge questioning the legality of the aircraft transfer. The legal challenge was led by Professor Elizabeth Hartley, a constitutional law expert from Oxford University who specialized in royal property rights. She argued that aircraft purchased with public funds during Queen Elizabeth's reign should be considered crown property, not personal assets that could be given away freely. The case would force the courts to examine the complex relationship between personal and official royal property. At the same time, palace investigators were conducting their own internal review of how the transfer had been approved. What they discovered was troubling. The decision appeared to have been made without following proper protocols for disposing of royal assets. Several senior advisors claimed they had never been consulted about the aircraft's future. Sir Michael Thompson, the keeper of the privy purse who managed royal finances, was particularly upset when he learned about the transfer through news reports rather than official channels. He had been responsible for overseeing the aircraft's maintenance and operations for over a decade and felt that his expertise should have been sought before such a significant decision was made. The investigation revealed that Camilla had relied heavily on advice from her personal lawyer, Richard Sterling, who specialized in family law rather than constitutional matters. Sterling had apparently assured the Queen Consort that she had the right to dispose of items that had been placed under her care, but he may not have fully understood the unique legal status of royal property. Meanwhile, James Peterson received a call that would change his life forever. The caller identified himself as David Williams, a senior partner at one of London's most prestigious law firms. Williams explained that several prominent clients were interested in supporting James's position and were prepared to provide legal representation if the palace tried to take action against him. "What you did took courage," Williams told James over the phone. "There are people who believe that protecting royal heritage is more important than protecting royal feelings. We're prepared to stand with you if this goes further." James was surprised by the offer but also worried about the implications. He had acted based on his conscience and loyalty to the late Queen, but he hadn't expected to become the center of a legal battle. He asked for time to consider the offer, knowing that accepting legal support would make his conflict with the palace much more serious. The royal family's weekly meeting, normally a quiet discussion of upcoming engagements and family matters, became a tense confrontation. Prince William arrived at Buckingham Palace with a folder full of press clippings and legal documents, clearly prepared for a difficult conversation with his father and stepmother. William's anger was evident as he laid out his concerns. He pointed out that the controversy was damaging the monarchy's reputation at a crucial time when public support was already fragile. He also revealed that he had been contacted by several Commonwealth leaders who were concerned about the precedent being set for handling royal assets. "This isn't just about one aircraft," William said firmly. "It's about whether we understand our responsibilities as custodians of the Crown's heritage." Grandmother would never have approved of this decision. Camilla defended her actions, explaining that she had genuinely believed she was acting within her rights. She pointed out that Tom had always been respectful toward the royal family, and that the aircraft would be well maintained under his ownership. She also suggested that the media was deliberately inflating the controversy to damage her reputation. King Charles found himself torn between supporting his wife and addressing his son's legitimate concerns. He knew that Camilla's intentions had been good, but he also recognized that the decision had been poorly handled. The lack of consultation with other family members had created an appearance of secrecy that was damaging to the monarchy's reputation. The meeting was interrupted by urgent news from the palace press office. A major television documentary about the late Queen's legacy was being rushed into production, and the producers wanted to include a segment about the aircraft controversy. The documentary would reach millions of viewers and could significantly influence public opinion about the scandal. Even more concerning was news that several MPs were planning to raise questions about royal property management in Parliament. The controversy was moving beyond media criticism into the realm of political oversight, something the royal family always tried to avoid. Outside the palace, public demonstrations were beginning to organize. A group calling itself Protectors of Royal Heritage announced plans for a peaceful protest outside Buckingham Palace the following day. The group's leader, retired military officer Colonel Patricia Hayes, explained that they wanted to show support for preserving royal traditions and holding the family accountable for their decisions. Tom Parker Bowles was also facing increased pressure from unexpected sources. Several of his business partners had called emergency meetings to discuss how the controversy might affect their joint ventures. One major client had already expressed concerns about being associated with someone at the center of a royal scandal. The stress was beginning to show on Tom's family as well. His teenage children were being followed by photographers on their way to school, and his ex-wife had called to express her anger about their children being dragged into the public spotlight. Tom was starting to realize that keeping the aircraft might cost him more than just money. That evening, Geoffrey Hartwell received a phone call that surprised him. The caller was Lady Catherine Morrison, one of Queen Elizabeth's former ladies-in-waiting and a close friend of the late monarch for over 40 years. Lady Catherine had remained silent during the first days of the controversy, but she could no longer stay quiet. "Geoffrey, I need to tell you something about what the Queen really wanted," Lady Catherine said quietly. She spoke to me about that aircraft just months before she died. She was very specific about wanting it to continue serving the royal family. Lady Catherine's revelation would prove to be the most significant development yet in the growing scandal. Her testimony about the late Queen's wishes would add enormous weight to the arguments being made by former staff members and constitutional experts. As the third day of the crisis came to an end, it was clear that the controversy had grown far beyond what anyone had anticipated. What had started as a family dispute was now involving lawyers, politicians, and protesters, with no clear resolution in sight. Lady Catherine Morrison's revelation sent shockwaves through the royal establishment and transformed the entire controversy. Her decision to speak publicly about Queen Elizabeth's private wishes was unprecedented, as ladies-in-waiting traditionally maintained absolute discretion about their conversations with the monarch, even after death. The interview with Lady Catherine was arranged through Geoffrey Hartwell and conducted by veteran royal correspondent Jonathan Pierce at Lady Catherine's country estate in Surrey. At 81 years old, Lady Catherine had served the Queen for 4 decades and was known for her unwavering loyalty and discretion. Her decision to break her silence demonstrated the depth of her concern about the aircraft situation. Her Majesty spoke to me about the aircraft in March. Just 5 months before she passed away, Lady Catherine revealed during the carefully recorded interview. She was reviewing her arrangements and wanted to ensure that important items would continue to serve the Crown. She specifically mentioned the aircraft as something that should remain available for royal duties. Lady Catherine's testimony was devastating because it directly contradicted the narrative that Queen Elizabeth had left these decisions to Camilla's discretion. The late Queen had apparently been very clear about her wishes, but those wishes had either been ignored or never properly communicated to the current royal family. The interview aired on BBC News at 6 o'clock that evening, and its impact was immediate. Within hours, the video had been shared millions of times on social media, with many viewers expressing outrage that the late Queen's specific wishes had been disregarded. The hashtag #Honor the Queen's wishes began trending globally. At Clarence House, Camilla's staff watched the interview in stunned silence. Helena Grant, Camilla's private secretary, immediately began making phone calls to try to understand how this information had never reached the Queen consort. The revelation suggested that there had been a serious breakdown in communication during the transition period after Queen Elizabeth's death. The palace investigators quickly discovered that Lady Catherine had indeed tried to communicate the Queen's wishes through proper channels. She had written a detailed letter to the Lord Chamberlain's office in September, just 2 weeks after the Queen's funeral, outlining various conversations about the monarch's preferences for specific items. However, the letter had apparently been misfiled during the chaos of the transition period and never reached senior palace officials. The discovery of the misfiled letter created a new crisis within the royal household. Several staff members who had been responsible for managing the transition were called in for urgent meetings to explain how such an important communication had been overlooked. The mistake revealed serious flaws in the palace's administrative systems during one of the most crucial periods in recent royal history. King Charles was reportedly furious when he learned about the letter. According to palace sources, he felt betrayed by his own staff's incompetence and was angry that Camilla had been placed in an impossible position due to their failures. He immediately ordered a complete review of all communications received during the transition period to ensure that no other important messages had been missed. James Peterson watched the evening news coverage from his small apartment, feeling a mixture of vindication and sadness. Lady Catherine's revelation proved that his instincts about the aircraft had been correct, but it also highlighted how much confusion and pain could have been avoided if the palace's systems had worked properly. The next morning brought even more pressure when Prince William released his own statement through Kensington Palace. The statement was unusually direct for royal communication, clearly expressing William's position without the typical diplomatic language used in royal announcements. The Prince of Wales has been made aware of Her late Majesty's wishes regarding the aircraft and believes that these wishes should be respected and implemented, the statement read. The Prince supports all efforts to ensure that royal heritage is preserved, according to the preferences expressed by Queen Elizabeth. William's statement was interpreted as a direct criticism of his stepmother's decision and created an obvious rift within the royal family. Royal correspondents noted that it was extremely rare for working royals to publicly disagree with each other, and the statement suggested that the controversy had damaged relationships that might take years to repair. Tom Parker Bowles was now facing pressure from all sides. The legal challenge was moving forward, with Professor Hartley's team preparing arguments that the aircraft transfer had been invalid from the beginning. His business partners were becoming increasingly nervous about the negative publicity, and even some of his friends were suggesting that he should return the aircraft to avoid further damage. The most painful pressure came from his own family. His mother was being crucified in the press, and his stepfather, the king, was caught in an impossible position between supporting his wife and honoring his mother's memory. Tom began to realize that his acceptance of the gift had triggered a crisis that was damaging the entire royal family. That afternoon, Tom made a decision that surprised everyone. He called his lawyer and instructed him to begin the process of returning the aircraft to royal ownership. However, the lawyer explained that the situation was now too complicated for a simple reversal. The legal challenge meant that any changes to the aircraft's ownership would need to be approved by the courts. Meanwhile, the protests outside Buckingham Palace were growing larger each day. Colonel Patricia Hayes had organized a well-disciplined demonstration that attracted supporters from across the country. Many protesters were military veterans who felt a special connection to Queen Elizabeth and were offended by what they saw as disrespect for her memory. The protesters carried signs reading "Honor the Queen's wishes" and "Protect Royal Heritage." Several veterans gave interviews explaining that they had served under Queen Elizabeth's command and felt duty-bound to defend her legacy. The sight of decorated war heroes protesting against the current royal family created powerful imagery that dominated news coverage. Inside Parliament, questions were being raised about the broader issue of royal property management. Several MPs announced plans to propose new legislation that would create clearer guidelines for distinguishing between personal and official royal assets. The controversy had revealed that current laws were unclear and open to interpretation. As the fourth day of the crisis ended, it was becoming clear that the situation had grown far beyond what anyone could have imagined. What had started as a simple family gift had become a constitutional crisis that was forcing difficult questions about royal authority, property rights, and respect for tradition. The royal family faced their biggest challenge in years, with no easy solutions in sight and relationships that might never fully recover from the damage that had been done. The fifth day of the crisis brought an unexpected development that would change everything. Early that morning, James Peterson received a phone call from Buckingham Palace requesting his immediate presence for a meeting with senior officials. He arrived at the palace expecting to be dismissed from his position, but instead found himself in a room with the Lord Chamberlain and several other high-ranking officials. Lord Pemberton. The Lord Chamberlain was a man known for his diplomatic skills and deep understanding of royal protocol. He had served in various palace roles for over 20 years, and had helped manage several royal crises during that time. His presence at the meeting signaled that the palace was taking James's situation very seriously. "Mr. Peterson," Lord Pemberton began carefully, "we find ourselves in a most unusual situation. Your actions have created significant complications, but they have also revealed important information that we needed to know. We're here to discuss how we might move forward constructively." James was surprised by the tone of the meeting. He had expected anger and punishment, but instead found officials who seemed genuinely interested in understanding his perspective. They asked detailed questions about his knowledge of the late Queen's feelings about the aircraft and his relationships with other long-serving staff members. What James didn't know was that the palace had spent the previous evening conducting urgent consultations with constitutional experts and former senior officials. The consensus was that James had actually performed a valuable service by bringing the truth to light, even though his methods had been questionable. Meanwhile, at Cambridge, Prince William was meeting with his own team of advisors to develop a strategy for resolving the crisis. William had been deeply affected by Lady Catherine's revelation about his grandmother's wishes, and was determined to ensure that those wishes were respected. However, he also recognized the need to find a solution that wouldn't completely destroy his relationship with Camilla. William's private secretary, Simon Fletcher, had been working through the night to develop options for moving forward. The challenge was finding a way to honor the late Queen's memory, while also allowing the current royal family to save face. Fletcher believed that the solution might involve creating new protocols for managing royal property that would prevent similar problems in the future. At the same time, Tom Parker Bowles was dealing with increasingly urgent pressure from his legal team. The constitutional challenge was gaining momentum, and there were now suggestions that criminal charges might be possible if the aircraft transfer was found to have been fraudulent. Tom's lawyer strongly advised him to cooperate fully with any investigations and to consider making a public statement, acknowledging the problems with his acceptance of the gift. The stress was taking a toll on Tom's family life as well. His children were being harassed at school by other students who had seen the news coverage, and his business was suffering as clients began to distance themselves from the controversy. Tom was beginning to understand that some decisions cannot be undone, regardless of the intentions behind them. Camilla herself was experiencing the darkest period of her time as queen consort. She had worked hard for years to overcome public skepticism about her role in the royal family, and the aircraft controversy was undermining all of that progress. Many of the charitable organizations she supported were receiving angry calls from donors who were threatening to withdraw their support. Her private secretary, Helena Grant, had arranged meetings with several of Camilla's closest advisors to discuss damage control strategies. However, the options were limited because the fundamental facts of the case were not in dispute. Camilla had given away an aircraft that the late Queen had wanted to remain in royal service, and no amount of public relations work could change that reality. The afternoon brought news that would shift the entire dynamic of the crisis. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, released a statement calling for reconciliation and forgiveness in the royal family. The Archbishop's intervention was significant because he had officiated at both Queen Elizabeth's funeral and King Charles's coronation, giving him unique moral authority in the situation. Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth understood the importance of both tradition and forgiveness, the Archbishop's statement read. In this difficult time, we should remember her example of grace under pressure and her belief in the possibility of redemption through honest acknowledgement of mistakes. The Archbishop's statement was widely interpreted as a call for Camilla to publicly acknowledge her error, while also asking the public to show compassion for her situation. Religious leaders across the Commonwealth echoed similar themes, creating a framework for potential resolution that focused on healing rather than punishment. That evening, King Charles made a decision that surprised everyone involved in the crisis. He announced that he would personally address the nation about the aircraft controversy in a special television broadcast scheduled for the following day. Royal addresses to the nation were extremely rare and were typically reserved for matters of the highest national importance. The announcement of the King's address immediately changed the news coverage of the crisis. Speculation began about what Charles might say and whether he would support his wife or distance himself from her decision. Palace officials refused to provide any advance information about the content of the address, maintaining strict secrecy about the King's plans. Behind the scenes, Charles was working with his most trusted advisors to craft a speech that would address the controversy while also attempting to heal the divisions that had emerged within the royal family. The challenge was enormous. He needed to acknowledge the mistakes that had been made, while also protecting his wife's dignity and his own authority as monarch. The speech-writing process involved multiple drafts and consultations with constitutional experts, family members, and even representatives of the former staff members who had raised concerns about the aircraft transfer. Charles was determined to find words that would honor his mother's memory, while also providing a path forward for his own reign. As the fifth day of the crisis came to an end, everyone involved knew that the King's address would be a pivotal moment. The speech could either begin the process of healing and resolution or create new problems that would be even more difficult to solve. The entire nation waited to hear what their king would say about one of the most serious controversies of his reign so far. The evening of King Charles's address to the nation arrived with unprecedented public interest. Television networks cleared their schedules, and millions of people across the Commonwealth prepared to hear their monarch speak about the crisis that had consumed the royal family for nearly a week. The address was scheduled for 8 o'clock, broadcast live from Buckingham Palace. In the hours leading up to the speech, Charles spent time in quiet reflection in his private study. He reviewed the final draft of his remarks one last time, knowing that his words would be analyzed and remembered for years to come. The weight of the moment was enormous, not just for the current crisis, but for the future of his reign and the monarchy itself. Camilla waited in their private apartments. Having been consulted about the speech but not involved in writing it, she understood that Charles needed to address the nation as the king, not as her husband, and that his primary obligation was to the crown rather than to protecting her feelings. The realization was painful but necessary for both of them. At 8 o'clock precisely, King Charles appeared on television screens across the nation. He was seated at his desk in the same room where his mother had delivered many of her most important addresses. The symbolism was deliberate, connecting his words to the long tradition of royal responsibility and service. "My fellow citizens of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth," the king began, his voice steady and solemn, "I speak to you tonight about matters that have caused concern and division in recent days. These are not matters I address lightly, but the circumstances require clarity and honesty from your king." Charles acknowledged the controversy directly, explaining that mistakes had been made in the handling of his mother's legacy. He revealed the discovery of Lady Catherine's letter and the administrative failures that had prevented important information from reaching the appropriate officials. Most importantly, he announced that the aircraft would be returned to royal ownership and dedicated to serving the crown in perpetuity. "My beloved mother, Queen Elizabeth, dedicated her life to serving this nation and the Commonwealth," Charles continued. "Her wishes regarding the continuity of royal service must be respected and honored. I have therefore decided that the aircraft in question will be returned to royal ownership and will serve as a memorial to her dedication to duty." The king's words about his wife were carefully chosen to acknowledge her mistake while also expressing his continued support and love for her. He explained that Camilla had acted with good intentions, but had been given incomplete information during a difficult transition period. He asked the public to show the same compassion and forgiveness that Queen Elizabeth had always demonstrated throughout her long reign. "The Queen Consort has served our family and nation with dedication and grace," Charles said. "In this instance, she was placed in an impossible position by circumstances beyond her control. I ask that you remember her years of service and judge her by the totality of her contributions rather than by a single difficult moment." The most surprising part of the address was Charles's announcement of new protocols for managing royal property and heritage. He revealed that a new Royal Heritage Council would be established, including representatives from Parliament, constitutional experts, and former royal staff members. This council would provide guidance on important decisions about royal assets and ensure that the wishes of deceased monarchs were properly preserved and honored. James Peterson watched the address from his apartment, feeling a mixture of relief and vindication. The king's words vindicated his decision to speak out, while also providing a framework for resolving the crisis that had consumed his life for the past week. Most importantly, the late queen's wishes would be honored, which had been his primary concern from the beginning. Tom Parker Bowles issued his own statement immediately after the king's address, formally transferring the aircraft back to royal ownership and expressing his regret for the controversy. His statement was gracious and humble, acknowledging that he should have asked more questions before accepting such a significant gift. The legal challenges against him were quickly withdrawn following his cooperation and the king's announcement. The public reaction to the king's address was overwhelmingly positive. Social media, which had been filled with angry criticism for days, suddenly shifted to messages of support and admiration for the king's handling of the crisis. Many people praised his honesty, his respect for his mother's memory, and his balanced approach to a difficult family situation. Royal commentators were equally impressed with Charles's performance. Margaret Thornton appeared on BBC News immediately after the address to offer her analysis. "This was exactly the kind of leadership the monarchy needed," she explained. "The king showed that he understands his responsibilities, while also demonstrating compassion for his family. Most importantly, he honored his mother's wishes and created new safeguards for the future." The protesters outside Buckingham Palace began to disperse peacefully after hearing the king's words. Colonel Patricia Hayes announced that the demonstration's goals had been achieved and thanked all the veterans and citizens who had participated. His Majesty has shown that he listens to the people and respects the memory of our beloved Queen Elizabeth, she told reporters. In Parliament, the MPs who had been planning to raise questions about royal property management praised the King's proactive approach. The announcement of the Royal Heritage Council addressed many of their concerns and demonstrated that the monarchy was capable of reforming itself when necessary. Several MPs withdrew their planned parliamentary questions, satisfied that the issues had been properly addressed. The following weeks brought significant changes to the royal household. James Peterson was not only retained in his position, but was promoted to a senior role within the Royal Heritage Council, where his knowledge of royal traditions and his demonstrated loyalty to the crown would be valuable assets. His decision to speak out, initially seen as a betrayal, was now recognized as an act of courage that had prevented greater damage to the monarchy. Lady Catherine Morrison was also invited to join the Heritage Council, bringing her decades of experience and intimate knowledge of Queen Elizabeth's wishes to the new organization. Her decision to break her traditional silence had been vindicated, and she was now seen as a guardian of royal memory, rather than a betrayer of royal confidence. Camilla gradually rebuilt her public reputation through consistent charitable work and careful public appearances. The crisis had been painful, but it also taught her important lessons about the complexity of her role as Queen Consort. She worked closely with the Heritage Council to ensure that similar misunderstandings would never occur again, and her willingness to learn from her mistakes earned her respect from staff members who had initially been critical. The aircraft itself was transformed into a flying memorial to Queen Elizabeth, used primarily for official royal visits to Commonwealth countries. A special plaque was installed commemorating the late Queen's years of service, and the interior was redesigned to include a small exhibition about her travels around the world. The plane became a symbol of continuity and respect for royal traditions. Tom Parker Bowles successfully rebuilt his business relationships and maintained his low-profile lifestyle, having learned valuable lessons about the responsibilities that come with royal connections. His handling of the crisis's resolution earned him respect from both the media and the public. And his relationship with his stepfather, the King, actually grew stronger as a result of their shared experience. The Royal Heritage Council proved to be one of the most successful innovations of Charles's early reign. The Council's work in cataloging and preserving royal heritage prevented numerous potential controversies and created a new model for transparency in royal administration. Former staff members, constitutional experts, and parliamentary representatives worked together to ensure that the monarchy's traditions were preserved while also adapting to modern expectations. 6 months after the crisis, a comprehensive review of the transition period following Queen Elizabeth's death revealed that over 24 important communications had been misfiled or overlooked during the chaotic weeks after her funeral. The Heritage Council's work in organizing and prioritizing these communications helped resolve several smaller disputes and ensured that the late Queen's wishes were properly honored. Across all aspects of her legacy, the aircraft controversy became a case study in crisis management at universities and business schools around the world. Students analyzed how a simple family decision had escalated into a constitutional crisis, and how effective leadership and honest communication had ultimately resolved the situation while strengthening the institution involved. Years later, historians would mark the aircraft crisis as a turning point in King Charles's reign, the moment when he demonstrated his ability to balance family loyalty with constitutional responsibility. The crisis tested every aspect of the modern monarchy and proved that the institution could adapt and reform itself when faced with legitimate criticism. James Peterson often reflected on his decision to speak out, knowing that it had changed not only his own life, but the entire royal family.